Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salam ala Rasulullah nabina Muhammad wa sahbihi ajma'in. Let me just start by welcoming our distinguished speaker tonight, Professor Hugo Sonnenschein. Professor Sonnenschein was the provost of Princeton and then moved to be the president of the University of Chicago. And he's now a distinguished professor of economics at the University of Chicago. Professor Sonnenschein is very well known in academia. He's a member of the U.S. Academy of Sciences and a member of many other important organizations. He's been helping us also at KFUBM as a member of the International Advisory Board of KFUBM, and probably the only member who's been attending all meetings since inception. Let me also welcome my colleagues, the distinguished directors of Saudi universities who are with us here in the hall, and also our speakers who are participating in the workshop, as well as welcome all participants tonight. We have about 300 people participating with us, including some of our graduate students who are studying in North America and Europe and Australia. Of course, Saudi faculty, male and female, are also joining us. So join me, please, in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Hugo Sonnenschein.
Thank you very much. Thanks to my good friend, Khalid Al-Sultan, rectors, colleagues. I've been asked to speak on the subject, What Makes Universities Great, with a subtitle of Success Factors, and I'm privileged to speak to you. I have in my mind particularly the rectors in Saudi, but I know that people who are listening in, people in fact in the audience, come from a variety of backgrounds. But as I speak, I really don't know each one of you, but I have the leadership of the Saudi universities particularly in mind. Good evening to you. It's good morning to me. I'm in my office at the University of Chicago. And it's a privilege to speak to you. I've been honored to teach and lead at 3 of the great universities. And this is perhaps the reason that Rector Khalid turns to me. And I'm going to begin by lowering your expectations. As you well know, there's no formula for greatness. At best, there are some commonalities and perhaps some good practices. And so I've considered how to answer your important question. I'll speak about what the great universities have in common, and I will tell some stories that exhibit the sound of our great universities. My goal is really to suggest some ideas that may help your universities to do somewhat better. Modest improvements, year after year, add up. The great universities may serve to inspire, but setting out to copy them may not be the best course. You should take advantage of your unique opportunities and find the way that best fits your own needs and circumstances. There are very particular needs in the kingdom. I'm sure there are very particular needs in your own countries and in your particular universities. So I could give some context. Khalid gave a very good introduction. Who I am sort of matters and affects the way that I think about universities and success factors. I'm a researcher, I'm a committed teacher, I'm very proud of the students I've had, the ones who have gone on to academic positions, have had tenured positions at Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Berkeley, Stanford, LSE, etc. And so this is who I am. And this affects very much the way that I look at universities. Sort of another element of context. Neither of my parents attended college. They believed that an outstanding education might enable me to have a richer life than was possible for them. And by richer, I don't mean just money, more meaningful, happier, more satisfying life. And they were willing to sacrifice to provide me with that kind of education. And so I was raised with the idea that education and learning is the path towards growth and opportunity. That is the road to positive transformation. And that academic achievement is to be celebrated. And really, the truth is I've never quite gotten over this. I'm a true believer. I'm really very biased. I believe that your success as college and university leaders is critical to the development of your people and to the development of your respective countries and the kingdom. And I speak unashamedly from that point of view. You've been called upon and you've been given great responsibility. May you use that responsibility well. The purpose of my talk is to try to make some small suggestions that may be helpful as you chart your course. So, what makes universities great? What is it that the great universities to have in common? And I ask you to, before I give you my list, to think yourselves about that. How would you define those qualities, those commonalities? I'm going to give you my list, but you should have your own, and you should think about this. My list starts with a culture of excellence, a culture of excellence. That's my number one. The most successful universities arouse themselves. Arouse is a strong word. They arouse themselves to pursue excellence. Okay is not good enough. These universities are reflective. They're self-critical, and they set very high standards. Or at least they try and do this, and they tend to be this way. It's a difficult course to pursue. You will hear people say to themselves and colleagues, is this the best that we can do? Does our research, does your research deal with the most important problems? Can we teach better? We prune, we deny tenure to very able young people because it's a constant, important piece of our work to identify, develop the very best. So the economics department at the University of Chicago is not very large. We have less than 30 tenure-track faculty. And of those 30 tenure-track faculty, 4 have been awarded the Nobel Prize. This sets a very high standard. One of our Nobelists, Bob Lucas, on the day he was awarded the prize, was asked by the New York Times whether this recognition would influence the way that he expected to be treated by colleagues tomorrow. Bob's response, after a chuckle, the prize recognizes my old ideas, work of the past. The way I will be treated tomorrow will depend on what my colleagues think of my new ideas. And if I am wrong or weak tomorrow, they will not hesitate to tell me so. So great universities have a culture of excellence. And such a culture can sometimes be brutal, a bit disrespectful. That story has an element of disrespect, or at least feel that way to some. We are in some ways rather tough places. There's another story which is not about an individual, but about a school. The University of Chicago has a great history in K-12 education, a school that was founded by the great educator Dewey. But the training of K-12 teachers was something that at some point we felt did not fit very well with our mission. There are reasons for this, there are complicated reasons. I don't want to go into this, but the point is the training of the teachers for K-12 is central to schools of education. And while we had great strength in the academic study of education, what makes education work, social science departments that had strong people who thought about education and urban education, that's different than training K-12 teachers. Now, we could have made an alliance with schools that were good at K-12 education. This turns out to be a difficult thing to do. And we decided that the best course was to close this school, which in fact meant letting some faculty go. And has a very cold feeling to it. It was a tough thing to do. But for us, it was felt, and I believed, that the best course was to concentrate on the aspects of K-12 education that we could lead the nation in. And I believe that we've done that. But the process was a difficult one. And the things you have to do to understand where you are most excellent can be hard. So this was number one, a culture of excellence, and sad that I concluded with a particular area which was difficult for us, but always working to be your best, understanding what you can do well, and just driving your activities that way, what's important and what you can do well, and figuring out a way how to do it well. So number two on my list. Number two on my list is what I call mission-driven. The great universities have a well-articulated mission. Moreover, it's more than this. They are mission-driven. All universities and colleges should have a mission and a vision, and this is best created with input from your various constituencies. Successful universities tend to have a somewhat sharper vision than most, and they tend to be what I will define as mission-driven. And what this means is that their major initiatives and everyday work will be described well by their mission. So now this isn't entirely fair, but I have in my hand the mission statement and vision of KFUPM, which I'm going to use as an example. And I'm now going to read almost word for word in a slightly abbreviated form from that statement. First, the vision of KFUPM to be a preeminent institution known for its globally competitive graduates, cutting-edge research, and leadership in the field of energy. Teaching and research are the two core functions of KFUPM. And then mission, to make a difference within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and beyond in the fields of science, engineering, and business. That's the statement. And if you now reflect on what I said and draw it out, what are the key phrases? The key phrases are globally competitive graduates, cutting-edge research, energy leaders, teaching and research, our own country and beyond, sciences, engineering, and business. And I suspect that this describes the goals of no other university in the kingdom, very few in the Middle East, if any, and a small number, a relatively small number in the world. And that's a good thing. The mission statement is not trite. It has sharpness. It significantly defines KFUPM, its history, and its aspirations going forward. However, in speaking about the idea of mission-driven, we're concerned with more than the precision of KFUPM's mission statement. We ask the following question. To what extent are the primary actions of KFUPM during the past several years, let's say 10 years, explained by its vision and by its mission statement? This is how we assess whether or not KFUPM is mission-driven. So let's see. What have been these initiatives in the time that I've been privileged to serve on the advisory committee? A new school of geosciences, petroleum and geosciences, geosciences and petroleum engineering. Partnership with departments at MIT, Georgia Tech, Stanford, Caltech. Support of the Durand Techno Valley. Internships and study abroad. And an initiative in its School of Management. If you go down this list, let's start with the new School of Geosciences and Petroleum Engineering. Well, you know, this is squarely in the mission statement. The mission statement says energy, partnerships with departments of at MIT, etc., Caltech. Well, that has to do with aspirations that go beyond the kingdom. And it also speaks to research and teaching, which are stated in important ways in the mission and vision statements. Support of the Durand Techno Valley. That both is connected to the research aspirations, gives opportunity for teaching. The companies there are very energy related. Internships and study abroad connect with these linkings with MIT, Georgia Tech, Stanford, and Caltech, where some of these study abroad opportunities take place. And so there's also the list of what KFUPM has chosen not to do, and that's equally important. But the key initiatives that have been developed really fit squarely with the mission and the vision. And because of that, I think it's quite clear that KFUPM is mission-driven. So, you know, you probably at all of your universities and colleges have mission statements and vision statements, because everybody's doing that, and if you haven't done it, I encourage you to do it. It's an essential first step. It's a best practice. But if it's going to be meaningful, it means that this guides you. It means that you're mission driven. So mission driven is really a clear characteristic of the most successful universities. They know what they are, they say what they are, and then they use it in their decision making. So number three is the central role of faculty. Those of you who have been privileged to be up close to these special kinds of places will understand this. At great universities, ideas flourish, and the faculty is invested in and has the major responsibility for research and teaching. And they receive very substantial deference in academic decision making, such as hiring, promotions, and program formulation. Breakthrough ideas and excellence are celebrated. They are the work of the faculty. Teaching is celebrated. At great universities, faculty are truly in the lead. And not only are they in the lead, but much has to be provided by an administration. They're comfortable with the allocation of resources and the manner in which administrators exercise their authority. And that depends, their ability to exercise their authority depends really on the support of the faculty. So another story. William Bowen, the former president of Princeton, was a great leader, and I was very privileged to be a faculty member and later a provost when he was president. He had a very significant influence on the directions that Princeton took. Under his leadership, Princeton initiated programs in literature and poetry that brought extraordinary people to the university. Good example is Toni Morrison, who won a Nobel Prize. She wouldn't have fit as easily into an English department at that time, but Bowen found ways to strengthen the university. He had great capacities. He had a great, profound influence on the trajectory of Princeton, and a great deal of, let me shamelessly use the word, power. He was an administrator with power. Bowen was a major figure in bringing women to a school that had been male only for hundreds of years. Yet he always made faculty feel that he was working for them, rather than they working for him. And some of this was captured in the following sound. He would regularly say, "My proudest achievement is the quality of the faculty I brought to Princeton." And he meant it, and people felt it. I might add that students at Princeton, many of whom he knew well and stayed in contact with after graduation, also felt that Bowen's purpose was to serve them. At great universities, presidents, rectors, chancellors, trustees have enormous power. But one feels that it is being used in the service of faculty and students. And it's faculty and students who are responsible for the real work of the university, which is teaching and learning and research. And so let me refer to this as point 3. the central role of faculty. Success is defined by faculty quality and the extent to which they fulfill and embrace their responsibilities, and their ability to do this depends on the way that they're treated and how they're meant to feel by an administration. Item 4, we're running through these things. I hope you also have your own list. The importance of research. Most, arguably all, of the great universities are research intensive. They are responsible for a significant percentage of the discoveries that change the world. Research is their business. Those are big statements. But let's be careful. There are excellent colleges and specialized training schools that are not research intensive. Research intensive may not be for some of you. Some of these colleges and training schools make substantial contributions to education. And also, being research intensive does not make a university great. You can be research intensive, but the research may not be so wonderful. Nevertheless, most of the universities that we classify as great are research intensive, and for these select universities, the expectations are high. So for research intensive universities that meet this measure of being great, high expectations. And I'm going to put this in a tough way. From time to time, they should be places of discoveries and ideas that change the world. For these select universities, the work of the faculty, as well as the learning of the students, is significantly devoted to discovery and the development of new knowledge. And the expectation that from time to time, these universities will produce ideas that change the world is not too high a standard. I'm going to prove this by shamelessly bragging about the University of Chicago. We're not an old university. We were founded 100 years before I began my service as president. But during that time, we were the place that first measured the speed of light, Michelson-Morley experiment, employed hormone therapy for the treatment of certain cancers, that's Huggins, the place where Saul Bellow, the greatest American author of the second half of the 20th century, penned his novels, the place where Subramanian Chandrasekhar pushed how ideas from relativity led to the ideas of black holes in space. So black holes were invented almost at the University of Chicago. It is where the field of law and economics was born, and the idea of human capital was conceived and demonstrated to be pivotal for understanding the development of societies. Each of these steps forward was recognized by a Nobel. And this is but a small selection of the great achievements from one university. Shamelessly, I will tell you that other than Michelson, I knew these people. I went to concerts with them. I had dinner with them at my home. So at the great research-intensive universities, discovery is our business, and we expect there to be an important announcement every 2, 3, or 4 years. That is a big aspiration and a big responsibility. And, you know, we're talking about the great universities, it's a small number. And these expectations extend to the further work they extend of our students, the work they do after they're at the university. And many of them take their first research steps at the university. Again, I'm going to shamelessly brag. James Dewey Watson of double helix fame began his study of biology at Chicago, and he did research while an undergraduate. Paul Samuelson came to us as an undergraduate and studied economics and did research. So I'm going to refer this to this fourth point, the importance of research, but I like better the descriptor at these universities and as an aspiration. Research is our business. So now I'm running out of time, and in the remainder of my time I'm going to speak briefly about three connected ideas: cultivating a following, arousing a following, the special role of alumni, and finally resources and fundraising. And I'm going to do these more quickly. A following. The success of your university or college depends on your success in arousing a following. Great universities have a following that starts with students, alumni, and the local community, but extends beyond these constituencies. The most successful universities are nationally and internationally known, and they are internationally and nationally supported. They are the pride of regions and nations. They influence their communities and the world. They change accepted thought and generate ideas that start companies and influence policy. The public attaches itself to them because they desire to be attached to excellence. They are where you go to solve hard problems that matter, or perhaps experience the joys of artistic expression. They are the place that the business community goes to in search for the most outstanding talent. Great universities have a global reach and a global following with a broad range of constituencies. They arouse a following. And alumni are a critical part of this, and this is my number 6. At the very most successful colleges and universities, alumni play a central role in supporting their university and getting the word out. From their time spent as students, alumni know the place in an intimate way, and many will testify that the time they spent in school was transformative. It is not infrequently where they had their first taste of significant independence, which is a memorable feeling, excuse me. They make friendships that last a lifetime. Alumni care about the character and standing of the university. They are invested in it. Throughout their life, they're asked, and where did you study? They may hope that other members of their family will someday attend their school. They benefit from the achievements of the faculty and fellow graduates and their reputation. Friendships that begin in school sometimes continue into later life. And as the alumni network grows, professional relationships are formed thanks to the shared experiences, regardless of the year of graduation. Who can tell your story better than your alumni? 7, and my last point, resources and fundraising. Resources do not guarantee excellence, but excellence requires resources. And excellence is expensive. Resources almost always come from a variety of sources, and the particular sources vary among universities and across countries. But nevertheless, there are some general principles. The part that comes from the state, government, or kingdom ultimately depends in some significant way on the support that you have from the people, public support. The understanding of and belief in your work by the public is critical. The public needs to be considered as a part of your following, together with the institutions that write the actual checks. Hopefully some of your well-placed alumni can be champions who help to rally the public following. In my country, alumni are not only central members of the following, but they are financially generous as well. The great research universities in the US typically raise $500 million to $1 billion each year from individuals and private foundations. Much of this comes directly or indirectly from alumni. Our efforts in creating a following are in the long run essential to our success in generating resources. I think of our earning our resources. I think of us as earning our resource support by explaining every day to an army of followers the worth of our efforts and the consequence of our discoveries. And we explain to others this. And you also have to understand that the balance of support can change over time. So Rector Khalid and I, we both received our PhD from celebrated public universities, and each significantly state-supported. The public universities in my country have lost some of the generous public support that made them great. Think of Cal Berkeley, still a great university by any measure, but not a good event that it's lost this support from the state that made it great. The kingdom has been most generous, but I would suggest that it's prudent to think about how support is earned, and this needs to be explained to your followers, who should grow in size and importance and be a key source of your long-run strength. Following. You need a following. So, I've spoken about a culture of excellence, being mission-driven, the particular role of faculty, research expectations, the importance of a following, alumni, and resource gathering. I've not said enough about students. For me, they are not customers. Wrong word. We should expect much of them, and they should expect much from us. They come to our universities to learn and grow. We are dedicated to their success. I regard our work with students as a trust. And now some final thoughts. I wish that I was in your midst and I could see you. Our advisory committee at KFUPM has been privileged to be briefed about Vision 2030 and plans for 2020. And now I'm speaking particularly to the Saudis. I have some brief thoughts. If I had a crystal ball that told me how the world would change, even the price of oil in 2030, I would be a more successful planner and a much richer person. One must plan for a future that is really not at all predictable. That's That's a key point as you think about planning. You're planning for a future that you really can't predict. We should ask ourselves, what are the skills, and I mean skills plural, that are likely to remain valuable in a rapidly changing world? In a rapidly changing world, because the world is rapidly changing. Of course, this is not easy to know, but it may be better than betting on a particular industry or one or two narrow skills. Analytic capacity will be valuable for a long time. The ability to argue and to express ourselves well will remain valuable, as will the ability to work in a team and the ability to negotiate. It's important to understand the world. As an outsider, I believe that the most significant challenge of Vision 2030 is the capacity to develop, in a relatively short time, the varieties of human capital required to transform the income sources of the kingdom. My prejudices are that this starts with students at an early age, and that both soft skills and quantitative and verbal skills must be developed. It is hard work with cultural elements that need to be appreciated. And so you, the rectors, must be counted on to lead. And so with that thought, I'll close with some words of encouragement that I hope will have meaning to each and every one of you. Students are our future. They come to our universities with a variety of backgrounds and goals. Critical thought and the advancement of knowledge are at the heart of what we offer. We believe that this can confer great benefits to students and to the larger society. Our work is expensive, our work is demanding. It is at times quite imperfect, and we can claim too much. However, in the words of one of my thoughtful colleagues, most thoughtful colleagues, it is our best hope for a transformed existence. So, thank you very much. I'd be pleased to take some questions if you have any.
Thank you, Professor Sonnenschein, for a very, very enlightening speech, very focused and directed towards what makes great universities. I'm just moderating the Q&A session. We have some questions from the hall here. Those who are online and virtually with us, they can have their question using text messages from the system. They can write down the questions and the system, and we're going to read them from here. So we'll take up some questions here from the hall if anybody wants to comment. Dr. Khalid Sultan is giving his first question.
Hugo, great lecture. We enjoyed it. So I have a question regarding why in the past 4 decades the whole world did not produce more than probably 2 to 3 great universities. California, San Diego, KAIST, and the University of Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. But all others, with no exception, are very old universities. Do you think now we will see that in this century, probably only 1 or 2 or probably 3 universities? Or do you have a feeling that we stand to see more and more great universities being created in this century? Thank you.
Well, it's a hard question, and it's a very good question. This is difficult. I mean, part of what I've been trying to explain is that the standards are very high, and you know, it's not only a question of how many we will create, but it's a question of what's the right number. What should be the concentration of places where you have this amazing development of new knowledge? I would expect that in China, perhaps in India, with very large populations and quite a lot of appetite for what can be achieved by having these great universities, we might see, you know, a few more. But I'm not so sure that any of this should be looked at as a failure. The universities that were created in the United States, so the universities became great universities. You know, it's interesting. Stanford, going into the Second World War, that's not so very, very long ago, was probably not a great university. And now, you know, who knows? It could be the greatest. It's certainly one of the very, very greatest. And you mentioned San Diego. Also became extremely strong. So I don't know what the right rate of increase should be, but I would look towards the places that have had a relative shortage of the great universities, have an appetite for it. It's not just having the resources, it's having the following, it's having the appetite for it. Good question. I don't have a perfect answer.
Well, one of the next questions here we have, talking about the mission-driven feature of any university, and we know there are classification of universities for teaching universities, research universities, and applied universities, but one of the components you said was the focus and importance of research. So how would that fit other class of universities who don't have that type of research?
Yeah, I'm very pleased that you asked me this question. So I tried to be careful in my statement, and I may not have been careful enough. I think that there are schools that make enormous contributions to the public good that are not what we would call great universities. On the list that the rector was sort of suggesting. They may, for example, concentrate on rather narrow areas. They may be colleges, and they can be doing their work extraordinarily well and have a most important mission, and research just may not be a part of that or a central part of it. They may not be research intensive. So research intensive doesn't guarantee that you're a great university. Okay? And on the other hand, there are colleges, schools that are making most important contributions that are not research intensive. And that's how I would say it. And I think that's really what you were asking about. I don't want to suggest that having a research-intensive orientation is essential to being an important educational entity. That's not true.
Related to this question, there is another text question here talking about, since the focus of university is mostly in science and technology, is that a feature of great universities and exclude those which has literatures and humanity specialities and focus?
No, I think you know, some of these are matters of at the moment, great controversy. At the moment, the appetite for supporting technology, science, business, medicine, quite a lot of appetite, and less appetite for supporting the humanities, the arts, universities, the great universities, some great universities have had an extremely important role. Chicago among them, Princeton among them, Harvard, Stanford, in clearly putting large amounts of resources and giving a great deal of attention to the humanities and to the arts. And my list of achievements of the University of Chicago included that aspect. For my own tastes, I believe that developments in these areas, in the humanities and the arts, are very important. And I suspect that the person who asked the question may be concerned that I didn't give it even enough attention. It's at the moment somewhat difficult to raise resources for, but I will tell you at Chicago and at Harvard and at Princeton and at many of the great universities, there's been a fair amount of success in developing followings. Again, much of this comes back to followings who appreciate and will support those efforts. But let me again put a plug in for some of what I said. One of the things I want you to come away with is that the following, and this applies to the great and the less than great, the following that you're able to create for your institution, and think of this as very broadly interpreted, is extremely important to your success.
Okay, any question here from the hall?
Hugo, it's me again. So another question, observing the US compared to the rest of the world over the past 2 decades, we can see clearly that as some of the prosperity is moving slowly east, we see that the GDP of the US, manufacturing capacity, including every other aspect of their life, the US is sharing more with others. Others are taking probably some of the US share. But the higher education in particular is the exception. We can see that clearly the US has probably 3/4 of the top universities in any ranking that you mentioned, and with a very safe margin, it's ahead of everybody else. And we can see clearly that probably for the next few decades it will be. Any particular reason in your opinion why higher education in particular kept that leadership compared to the rest of what the US is doing?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think that this is slowly changing and will continue to change over time. We've been so blessed, so fortunate to have extraordinarily great public and private support. So the nation has been very good to us in supporting research and supporting education in general. And then individual philanthropy has been very significant, and we help that somewhat by our tax rules. And we, one of our great advantages is that we haven't been shy about attracting the best minds from around the world. So being a great university means you hire faculty. If you look at the faculty that we hire, they come from around the world, and they may have come to the United States as graduate students, and we have been flexible enough in the past to make it attractive to a fair percentage of the best and the brightest. Now, I have concerns for my country. I'll be very frank about this, and I don't want to turn this into a political speech, but I would not take it for granted that our universities will continue to get this exceptional support. And we will not help ourselves if we make it more difficult for people from other countries to come as graduate students. And other nations will take advantage of this. And people from those other nations will be more likely to go home. And I will give you another secret. It was the case that K-12 education, let's go through the the mid-1950s, was pretty good in the United States, and the percentage of people going to the university was rather high. We are not so exceptional any longer, and countries who do this in better ways, who will support their educational institutions more strongly, are going to make great progress. You know, I'm old enough that I really remember the way that European universities, German universities, French universities reformed themselves, put somewhat more money into these activities, and started hiring back people from the United States. There are great research institutions in Europe and now in Asia, and of course we have KAUST. These things don't change quickly, but I would not take the leadership of the United States as a given, and it starts with my feeling that it's not so clear that we're going to support these things the way that we have in the past, and other countries will. And I think it's a road to success for these countries. I hope that wasn't too political an answer.
Do you have any other question here in the hall? Okay. We have one of the text question here says, are great universities are the one who produce Nobel Prize winners?
You know, I think there's more of a measure than that. There are some important areas where, there's no Nobel Prize, particularly artistic areas, although there is, for writing. So I would not measure. So University of Chicago does very well if we count Nobel Prizes, but I would not measure the success of a university, nor would I measure greatness by the number of Nobel Prizes. On the other hand, this demand that, if you really want to talk about greatness, every 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, there should be an announcement. Something should come from these universities that is of a most fundamental, important level. And some of those things are recognized with a Nobel, sometimes wrongly. The committee is not perfect. So it's a sign, but I wouldn't count Nobel Prizes.
With that, I think we are closing the session with very our appreciation and thanks of all the audience here and the audience online with us, and for this great seminar and valuable and fruitful, I think, discussion that we have in the question and answer session. We look forward to see you another event, and the Academic Leadership Center at the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia is very thankful for your contribution.
Well, let me just say I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I look forward to traveling to Saudi this Friday. I will arrive on Saturday. And I'm just very grateful and Hope this has been a small amount of help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.